Welcome to the debate. Today, we're diving into, well, a really fundamental question about what education is actually for. We're drawing on insights from the economics of education in Nepal and related materials to tackle this. Should education primarily be seen as, let's say, an investment in human capital focused on economic returns? Or is it more about broader human development, enhancing individual capabilities, freedoms, and societal well-being beyond just the economic numbers? I'll be arguing for the human capital perspective, focusing on its role in economic productivity.
And I'll be taking the other side, arguing that education's deeper value lies in fostering human development and, social progress, looking beyond just the economics of it all.
Okay, so my perspective here is that for a developing nation like Nepal, education's primary function, really, has to be about building human capital. Think of it this way. Well, essentially like a company investing in new machinery to boost output, education is an investment in an individual's skills and knowledge, their human capital. It directly increases their productive capacity. And this isn't some abstract idea. It translates very clearly into higher productivity, better skills, and, importantly, higher wages for people. For the country, its economic growth, things like GDP, GNP, is directly tied to the quality and quantity of that human capital. We see this in tangible ways in Nepal. When the government invests in, say, teacher training, it's enhancing the human capital of those teachers, yes, but that then improves the human capital of the students they teach, making them ultimately more productive citizens down the line. Or consider vocational training for a farmer in modern farming techniques that directly boost their output, their income. Or Nepalese universities offering courses in software development. They're building the specific human capital needed for the tech sector, which, fuels the economy. So at the end of the day, this focus offers real private returns, better jobs, higher wages, and significant social returns like a more productive workforce overall.
I understand this sort of compelling logic of the economic argument, and obviously economic benefits often do come from good education. I won't deny that. However, I genuinely believe its more profound role, its fundamental purpose, lies in human development. It's about empowering individuals, expanding their capabilities, their freedoms. My core thinking here draws a lot from Amartya Sen's human development theory, which fundamentally argues that we shouldn't measure development just by GDP, by economic growth alone, but by people's actual capabilities and the freedoms they have. The key idea is that real progress isn't just about the national accounts. It's about enabling people to live lives they truly value, free from unnecessary constraints. That directly challenges a purely economic view. So from this angle, education is really an end in itself. It has intrinsic value way beyond just immediate economic payback. It contributes massively to a person's overall well-being, and that includes things like better health, more political participation, cultural enrichment, so much more than a paycheck. It's a fundamental human right, I'd argue, not just an economic lever. Think about government support for arts or music education. Maybe they don't lead directly to high-paying jobs, sure, but they profoundly enrich lives, foster a well-rounded citizenry, or basic literacy and numeracy. Yes, they help create a productive workforce, but maybe even more importantly, they create a better informed public, which is a public good in itself, right? Benefiting everyone. And concepts from critical pedagogy, empowering learners to question, to connect learning to their lives, that transforms students into socially responsible citizens. And beyond the individual, education is vital for social cohesion, transmitting values, identity, integrating people. As sociologists like Talcott Parsons highlighted, reducing divisions, promoting equality.
I appreciate you bringing up those broader benefits like cultural enrichment and civic life. They're important, no doubt. My concern is, well, maybe not concern, but my question is whether those broader aims should really precede what I see as the foundational purpose, especially in a development context. From my perspective, the core idea remains education's fundamental job is equipping people with skills and knowledge that increase their economic value. Education, viewed through that neoclassical economic lens which sees individuals as, rational actors making choices based on economic returns, It is a strategic investment in skills, in human capital. For a country like Nepal, this isn't just a nice-to-have. It feels like an essential path to lift people out of poverty, to build a strong, self-sustaining economy. The focus on returns on investment is what helps us allocate scarce resources effectively towards, well, tangible progress.
I'm just not convinced that framing education primarily through such a, let's say, narrow economic lens really captures its full scope or even its most vital function. Economic value is part of it, yes, but focusing solely on that, I worry it risks reducing education's truly transformative potential. Its primary purpose, as I see it, should be about liberation, empowerment, expanding human capabilities, fostering well-being that goes far beyond just market value. A strictly economic viewpoint, I think, risks overlooking really significant broader social benefits. For example, an educated population often correlates with lower crime rates. That's a huge social return, benefiting everyone, not just the economy in a narrow sense. It also leads to more civic engagement, which strengthens democracy. These are all aspects of a public good, benefiting society broadly, not just the individual earner, and you can't really just neatly package them into an economic calculation.
But when we talk about impact, especially for policy and investment decisions, it has to be measurable, doesn't it? From my standpoint, education's impact should primarily be tracked through clear quantitative economic metrics. We're talking GDP growth, higher individual wages, better labor productivity. Cost-benefit analysis is a key tool here. You compare the upfront cost of education against the future economic benefits, like increased tax revenue from graduates earning more over their careers. Take that example of a student pursuing an IT degree in Nepal. They're making a pretty clear, almost neoclassical investment calculation, right? Based on potentially high earnings, expecting a good private return. For policymakers spending public money, we need to show that this huge investment in education is actually paying off economically for the nation.
Okay, I get the appeal of clear numbers, I really do. But I think economic metrics alone aren't just insufficient, they can be frankly profoundly misleading. True development, as the human development approach argues, includes so much more than just the figures on a balance sheet. It's about qualitative improvements, better health, longer lives, real reductions in poverty, not just a higher average income. The value of education has to also be seen in its power to foster critical thinking, political participation, cultural understanding. These things are incredibly hard to quantify, I admit, but they are absolutely essential for a stable, just, thriving society. How, for instance, do you truly put a number on the value of a more engaged citizenry? Or the reduced burden on public health that comes from people making better choices because of education campaigns? These are massive, systemic impacts that just don't get captured by GDP per capita alone.
I do agree that some aspects are harder to pin down with numbers. But when it comes to practical policy priorities and where government intervention should focus, a clear economic rationale seems paramount to me. Government policies, I believe, should prioritize investments in education that demonstrably boost human capital and productivity. That means strategically funding things like vocational training, technical education, fields where there's high market demand and a direct link to economic output. And, from a classical economic view, the market itself could handle a lot of this. Private schools competing on quality, driven by parents seeking an economic advantage for their kids. The government's role, in that view, is more about ensuring fair competition, enforcing rules, maybe intervening less where the private sector can deliver efficiently.
See, I'm really not convinced by that line, especially in a developing country context. Efficiency is important, sure, but government intervention is absolutely crucial to ensure equitable access and to provide education as a fundamental right. It's vital for addressing market failures. Situations where the private market just won't provide enough of something essential because it's not profitable or because large parts of the population simply can't afford it. If education was just left to the market, so many people, particularly from poor families or remote areas in Nepal, would just be left behind. We even see challenges with so-called zero-cost education in public schools, which often still involves hidden costs for parents. So the government must step in. It needs to fully fund basic education as a true public good, make sure zero cost actually means zero cost.
offer scholarships, support disadvantaged students.
And that support has to include fields that might not promise immediate high economic returns, but are vital for enriching lives and building social cohesion, like arts education. The government's role isn't just regulation, it's about actively ensuring all citizens, regardless of background, get quality education. That's the equity principle.
But if we're not primarily focused on those direct economic returns, how do we justify the massive public spending that such a broad mandate requires? Especially when resources are so incredibly scarce, like in Nepal. The reality is we have to be strategic. Prioritizing direct economic upliftment through building human capital first that allows for tangible improvements in living standards in national output. And that in turn creates the fiscal space, the financial capacity for those broader social programs and human development goals later. Without that initial economic engine, many of the human development aims you champion become much harder, maybe even impossible to fund and achieve. For instance, growing the GDP via a skilled workforce generates more tax revenue, which then can be channeled into public health or arts programs. It feels like a necessary first step.
That's a compelling point about fiscal reality, absolutely. But have you considered that investing in a well-rounded citizenry with expanded capabilities, even in areas not immediately tied to economic output, might actually create a more resilient, innovative, and stable society in the long run? These aren't just nice-to-haves that we can afford after economic growth. They could be foundational elements for sustainable growth. A literate, informed populace, for example, leads to much better public health outcomes. That reduces healthcare costs, increases overall productivity, indirectly boosting the economy in powerful ways. These are real, though maybe indirect, economic contributions stemming from a human development focus, not just a narrow human capital one. Sociologists like Parsons, even Max Weber, talked about how education reduces divisions, promotes equality that fosters the social cohesion, essential for any economy to really thrive and innovate long term. It's about building a robust foundation for sustainable development, not just chasing short-term gains.
I acknowledge the long-term societal benefits you're describing, the well-rounded populace. However, in the context of desperately scarce resources, particularly in a developing nation, prioritizing that direct economic upliftment via human capital feels like a pragmatic necessity. It delivers tangible improvements now, jobs, better living standards, national output. That then creates the capacity for those broader enhancements. It seems like a sequence. We need to fund the healthcare, the infrastructure, the safety nets that allow human flourishing. And that funding often has to come first from a productive economy driven by skilled human capital.
I guess I'd frame it differently. While economic growth is undeniably vital, focusing primarily on human capital as just an investment carries the risk of creating an education system that's overly vocational, maybe too market-driven. That approach could neglect critical thinking, cultural appreciation, civic values, things that are absolutely fundamental to a healthy, functioning society. The very definition of development, I'd argue, has to go beyond just GDP growth. It has to include those qualitative improvements in well-being. By ensuring education provides capabilities and freedoms, we're not just churning out workers for the market. We're cultivating citizens who contribute in myriad ways, enriching society far beyond their paychecks. Human development isn't just a happy byproduct of economic prosperity. It should be the ultimate goal, with prosperity being one crucial outcome, but not the only one.
Well, what an incredibly insightful exploration we've had digging into these two really powerful ways of looking at education's role. I've emphasized education as that strategic investment in human capital, something that drives economic growth and national productivity, pointing to examples like IT degrees or vocational training in Nepal directly boosting economic indicators. My focus remains on that strategic investment for tangible progress as the primary driver.
And I've tried to passionately highlight education's intrinsic value, its profound impact on freedoms, on expanding what individuals can do and be, and its vital role in building a cohesive, well-rounded society. Drawing on ideas from Sen, critical pedagogy, and the need for social cohesion. It's clear, I think, that both perspectives offer really compelling arguments, with evidence from the Nepalese context supporting both. This conversation certainly shows just how complex, how multifaceted education's value truly is. It suggests that policymakers, anyone involved in funding, really have to navigate these often overlapping, yet sometimes distinct objectives. There's undoubtedly much more to explore in this whole discussion about how education shapes us as individuals and as nations.